Good afternoon to you. 5:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can help us do that today by dialing 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A pair of reports over the weekend out of the New York Times and Politico indicate that there was a much sweeter deal being cooked up by the Biden administration for Hunter Biden, and then the IRS whistleblowers went public with all of their allegations of corruption, and then they just gave Hunter Biden a regular old sweetheart deal, which fell apart in court. For more on what we learned over the weekend, it seems like we learn something new every day. Let's go to Margot Cleveland, senior legal correspondent over at the Federalist. Margot, good to have you with us today.
Thanks so much, Vince.
All right, big takeaways for you from this weekend's reporting probably includes those details. This was a very sweet deal they had set up, and is it possible at this point to firmly say that David Weiss appears to be a corrupt person?
I don't think yet that we can get there. I really think everything that we've seen so far is that he's a wuss. I mean, he doesn't have the backbone to stand up to this political pressure that you're getting.
Yeah.
And we see this coming from the Times article and Politico's article, where it really looked like Hunter Biden's attorneys were in there just bullying him, and he was frozen with indecision. So I don't think it's necessarily corruption, but even if it wasn't corruption and it was this frozen with indecision, inability to, stand up and
Yes.
and not worry about where the chips fall, at this point, we can't trust him.
Right.
We know he won't do the right thing. And we have him coming out and running cover for this interference from DOJ. So I wouldn't necessarily say that part's the corruption, but that's the company line. He's standing with DOJ even when DOJ did interfere in this. And now we have Weiss in the middle of that. He clearly saw the interference coming from DOJ.
I guess my point is that he's working to advance his own career, so he's giving Hunter Biden special treatment in order to do that. That sounds like a corrupt arrangement.
Yeah, I guess that would definitely be one way that you could look at it. I just wonder, though, if he's doing it to advance his career or doing it to just save face and get out of it, because I don't see where he's going. I mean, where is he going to go from being a U.S. attorney? The only other place you go usually is attorney general, and that's not happening. So I just and if you think about it, this all makes sense because they had enough to charge Hunter way before the 2020 election. So why didn't he do it then? The idea of him being undecisive and just weak, I think, goes with that. And, like some people can say, well, if you're in that position and you know what's happening, that's corruption. But my take is more that it's a weakness on his part, as opposed to something nefarious.
Yeah, or either way, however we get there, he's doing the wrong thing. So So we've got a top deputy of his, or at least for some time, a woman called Leslie Wolf. Her name has appeared a lot recently. The IRS whistleblowers indicated that she was the woman who was constantly stopping them from going down investigative paths that would have led to Joe Biden. She said no questions about the big guy, no questions about Dad, according to the IRS whistleblowers. We also now know that she was the one who negotiated the sweetheart plea deal for Hunter Biden from the get-go. What do we know about her now?
Right. So it wasn't just the sweetheart deal. It was the super sweet, extra sugar sweetheart deal where she had pushed for Hunter not to have any charges, but merely this pretrial diversion agreement on the gun charge. And she had actually contacted, from the way the Times says it, had contacted Clark, who was Hunter's attorney at the time, and said, pitch this as an idea. Hey, how does this sound? And then came out with the terms that included this huge immunity agreement and said, in a caveat to one of it, well, I haven't had this approved by the superiors. And then Weiss apparently said, no, he's going to plead to at least misdemeanor tax charges. And what happens then? Hunter's attorney just blows up and, goes crazy and says, you were manipulating, you were this, you were that. Again, showing who's running the show.
Right.
I mean, the government's supposed to be in charge here when they're negotiating that. So, but one of the things you were talking about, Leslie, was the one who was putting the brakes on everything.
Yes.
The New York Times, I'm pretty sure it might have been political, but pretty sure it was the New York Times, talked about Leslie reaching out to Clark, with whom she had built a rapport over the last 2 years.
Yes.
Yeah, no kidding. You're going to build a rapport with the attorney that somehow finds out that there's going to be a warrant, or they're going to come to question you, or that they're looking at what's in the locker or the storage cabinet. Yeah, I would think that would build a rapport with the defense attorney.
2 years of developing a rapport. That's a pretty nice timetable for a defendant. I mean, how unusual is that arrangement, Margot Cleveland, in terms of just like the Justice Department constantly making sure you have enough water, that you feel comfortable, that that everything's going okay, that we can all come to an agreement? Is that typical?
Well, I'm sure that prosecutors do build up rapports with good defense attorneys who are ethical and playing by the book, because professional attorneys do want to negotiate hard, but they also want to have professionals to work with. But it's crossing the line when that rapport turns into saying no to things and alerting the other side to things. So I think that we don't even have to say maybe half the cases there's a rapport where they feel that they can work and trust the other side to keep their word. But this is going way beyond that. And the Times also put in there that she appears no longer involved on the case.
Yes. Which
is interesting. I had heard from a source that she was actually in the courtroom when the plea hearing was going on. So that had to have been amusing, with Hunter Biden and his legal team squaring off against a different assistant U.S. attorney, and Leslie Wolf is sitting there, and she's the one who supposedly negotiated it.
So Leslie Wolf gets sidelined, and on that day, as the judge asks a couple of basic questions about the unusual arrangement, construction of this plea deal, in which Hunter Biden appeared to be set to receive blanket immunity for all of his foreign business dealings. The replacement assistant U.S. attorney was a guy called Leo Wise, and Leo Wise apparently wasn't on the same page as Leslie Wolf. He didn't realize that Hunter Biden was being granted immunity that was that sweeping. And that's apparently how this whole thing fell apart, at least according to the New York Times reporting this weekend. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the New York Times is playing a little fast and loose there, because Leo Weiss did say that it was limited to basically 3 categories: drug offenses, the gun offense, and the tax offenses. And that's where Hunter's attorneys originally objected. But then, and this is what the New York Times it really slid over.
Yes.
The attorneys went out of the room. They conferenced. They came back in, and they said, we're in agreement now. And they said, and the judge said, okay, well, what does this immunity protect? The government laid out those limited 3 things. The judge asked the attorney for Hunter Biden, do you agree that's what it's limited to? And he said yes. And then fast forward to the end of the hearing. At the end of the hearing, when she asked for further briefing, she said something to the effect of, I don't want to tell you how to write these diversion agreements, but I think you should try to maybe clean up the language so it is representative of the oral modification that happened today in court. And that was those 3 points. So I find that really amazing how the Times tried to make it sound like what blew up was that Leo was trying to contract the immunity, when in reality the attorney for Hunter Biden had already agreed orally in court the immunity was limited to 3 things.
Yeah, so, and I have a suspicion about that, and I'd like to hear your educated assessment of this. about that conference that those lawyers had. They all come back, and all of a sudden they're in agreement, but obviously the judge prevented this from all moving forward. My impression was that at that moment that the Justice Department, the U.S. attorney there, kind of gave Hunter Biden's attorneys a wink and a nod that, okay, just say that you accept the terms and we'll stop hassling you, but that's just between you and I.
Right. So that was one of my thoughts, but then I actually had a second thought, which was that the attorney basically said to Hunter's attorney said to him, look, just go along with it. It's in writing the other way. It's written much broader. And if they try to charge you, the writing is going to be what controls. And if not, you can basically say, well, my attorneys gave me bad advice.
And the reason I think that your assessment here is probably going to be what we'll be talking about in the weeks ahead is because already over the weekend, you're beginning to see an indication that Hunter Biden's attorneys over the last week, they've been leaving. They no longer represent him. They've decided they are now fact witnesses, and they want to argue that original plea deal stands because Hunter Biden's signature is on it. David Weiss's signature is on it. They consider that binding, and that Hunter Biden is entitled to blanket immunity. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that that's going to be a bad argument, especially since all of this background was leaked to the Times. And that was very clear that they were not content, they being the U.S. Attorney's Office, would not go forward with the pretrial diversion without the additional guilty plea. And that was what the party's understanding was. And that understanding could be shown from the document itself that it was not signed by the probation office. But even if they say, okay, this pretrial diversion agreement is binding, the blanket immunity, again, this is what's key, is Clark in court said it is not blanket immunity. Our understanding is it's these three things. And that's where, you're going to have continuous litigation on this.
That's definitely not what the text says. The text says he doesn't get prosecuted for anything involving these facts.
Basically, anything that was in the statement of facts. But there was another development that I thought was interesting. A lot of people looked at it like, okay, she dismissed the case, it's done. She actually only dismissed the gun case. She actually only dismissed the tax cases. The gun case is still there. And that means this judge, who was very skeptical of this pretrial diversion agreement, and to whom Hunter Biden's attorney said, yes, it's only these three things, she's going to be the one to decide whether or not there was blanket immunity, whether or not it's still binding. So that's gonna be a hard thing for Hunter to overturn with his new counsel.
All right, some other questions for you here, Margot Cleveland. Sure. Politico reports this weekend that Hunter's lawyers, in order to try and scare David Weiss into submission, they threatened to put Joe Biden on the stand as a fact witness. What do you make of that tactic?
That tactic right there was in October of 22, and that should have immediately sent Weiss to Garland, or Attorney General Garland, asking for special counsel status.
So smart, yeah.
And he didn't. Instead, what did he do? He represented to the country that he was the ultimate decision maker. And what did Attorney General Garland do? Even though Hunter's attorney had reached out to him, that was a key point, too. Even though Hunter's attorney was out there trying to get all the bigwigs at DOJ to intervene, the Attorney General tells the public and Congress that this is up to Weiss. There's no political issues here because this is solely up to Weiss. They were playing the presidential card to try to get no charges filed. That Weiss did not immediately go to the Attorney General on that and seek special counsel authority, to me, tells me we need impeachment inquiries to find out what happened. And he really should, if that's the case, be impeached, because he cannot do his job as the U.S. attorney in Delaware, and he should be nowhere near a special counsel investigation.
There's also a lot of attention in this Politico report, speaking of impeachment, on a never-before-seen bit of writing from Hunter Biden to one of his attorneys in an email. He says, quote, this is back in 2019, an email is from January 26th of 2020. I have a meeting tomorrow with impeachment lawyers for the day. Impeachment lawyers for the day. It will have to wait until Tuesday, I'm afraid. What do you make of this, that Biden was involved in Trump's impeachment?
I did not really figure that part out. I was looking at it, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. But one of the things that would be fascinating is if he was meeting with those impeachment folks, what lies might have been told? Because we know what they impeached Trump for was the converse of what was going on,
yes,
which was that Joe Biden had pressure to get the prosecutor fired in order to keep the Burisma, money trail going. So if Hunter was being interviewed, it had to have been what was going on in Ukraine. There's no way Hunter could tell the truth of what was going on in Ukraine. So I think you need to get some more questions and answers there.
Well, I'd like to know, is there a transcript of this? He spoke to congressional investigators. Is there a transcript of Hunter Biden's remarks to them? Was he under oath?
Yeah.
Isn't it a crime to lie to Congress? If he was misleading them, do we have other issues here?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was getting at as far as if he was under oath it actually might not even have to be under oath under some of the federal statutes. But I had not thought about the transcript part. But of course, this was all the Democrats. So it's highly unlikely that the Republicans were involved or had knowledge of that, but that would be a really important thing for the Weaponization Committee to take a look at.
Gosh, so many more questions as we get more answers. Okay, thank you very much. As always, Margot Cleveland from the Federalist. Really nice to talk to you as always. Coming up, Joe Biden en route. Have we seen any reports on, has he landed yet? I don't think he's landed. He's headed to Maui. He doesn't even know the name of the island. He doesn't know anything about what's going on there. He has no comment, he told the press, on the devastation in that American state. More on that coming up. Good afternoon to you. 5:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Has he landed? Yeah, Joe Biden has now landed in Hawaii. He is taking a break from his back-to-back vacations to finally go to visit the people of Hawaii, specifically the island of Maui, where an inferno destroyed an entire historic community beginning on August 8th. That was now many days ago that this chaos and disaster began. Of course, I was gone last week, but I saw some of these headlines, and it is just par for the course and so disheartening that we have a president of the United States asked about the catastrophe in one of the states that he's responsible for. He says no comment. No comment. And then the White House has now had to spend day after day after day scrambling to make up for his inattention to such destruction in his own country. It's what a shame that is. So he had to be scolded into going to Hawaii. He still hasn't gone, by the way, to East Palestine, Ohio. He made a commitment at one point that he'd go there after the government burned a toxic plume over that city. No, he has not gone. He's never going to East Palestine. It took forever to get them to even come within spitting distance of the American border. They hate actually governing. Governance is not what they're interested in. And here people struggle in Hawaii. Joe Biden finally taking a break from his vacation to go. What's the excuse for all this, by the way? What is it? If there was a good faith excuse? Oh, he's old. It's hard to get him to travel, and the time difference, and well, then he shouldn't be president. Obviously, why do we have a zombie, a walking carcass as president of the United States? If he can't do the job, then leave. What has happened in Maui is hard to even put into words. You have, as of this weekend, there were reports that over 1,000 people are missing. Over 1,000 American citizens are missing in Western Maui. Now over 100 people have been killed by the official record. And how many more among those 1,000 are actually dead? We don't know the answer yet. Searches continue. Cadaver dogs are roaming the wreckage, looking for bodies. Maui residents have been begging Joe Biden to pay any attention to them whatsoever. Here is one Maui resident, Ella Sable Takdaran, speaking on CNN this weekend and saying this.
And right now, the Maui community is helping the Maui community. And it's really affected me because where's the president? He decides to come here this week, to come here next week. I mean, like, where aren't we Americans too? Like, we're part of the United States, but why are we getting put in the back pocket? Why are we being ignored?
Because this is what he does. It's been the same way with every disaster. Every single one. Unless they can figure out how they can use it to their own political advantage, then they'll rush headlong into it. How can we demonize Republicans? You know, if Hawaii was run by Republicans, how different would the response be right now? From Biden, specifically. How different would it be? I would venture a guess that Biden would probably instruct his Justice Department to launch a civil rights investigation into why Republican officials in Hawaii allowed an entire minority-majority community to die in a fire. Don't you think? They would launch a civil rights investigation. Kristen Clark, the civil rights official, would be stepping off the plane with him right now. They'd step up somberly to microphones. They want to get to the bottom of why the people of Western Maui were abandoned by those cruel Republican officials. Wouldn't they do that? They would. They would do that. And you see any number of demonstrations from Biden and company about how we need to deal with this. This is what Republican governance yields. They don't care about the people. You need better government. You need Democrats. On and on and on and on. Here's the problem with Hawaii. Democrats run everything. Democrats run everything in Hawaii. Top to bottom. Even somebody like, Tulsi Gabbard is a former Hawaii congresswoman. She was apparently earlier in her political career, much more socially conservative. That you see some of the profiles. But she couldn't be a Republican. She couldn't be a Republican in Hawaii. You don't win election in Hawaii. You got to be a Democrat. And so Democrats control the state. And so they own this disaster. Now, they want to blame everything else. They want to claim that this was climate change that did this. And whatever human error was compounded by the climate change. It was the climate change. It was you driving an SUV that burned down an entire community in Western Maui. Here's Hawaii Governor Josh Green making that point this weekend.
So just to be clear, when you're talking about global warming, are you saying that climate change amplified the cost of human error?
Yes, it did. There's always going to be incredible things that people do to save lives.
This is Rahm Emanuel-esque. Never let a crisis go to waste. How do we advance the agenda with all of this human suffering?
Lives from the firefighters, from citizens, and there's always going to be decisions that are made that I'm sure aren't perfect in the moment. But when you have fire that moved more than a mile a minute, and what happened, I'm told by some of the survivors, they were at the initial fire. It was put out sometime late in the afternoon.
Do you know what firefighters need to fight a fire? Do you know what substance comes in handy for firefighters? This is not a trick question. It's water. You need water to put out a fire. And the reality on the ground was that local officials put in an urgent request to have water diverted from local streams in order to get water into those hydrants to douse that fire. Do you know how long it took for the officials in charge of that decision to render a judgment? 5 hours. It took them 5 hours. What happened during that time frame? The hydrants in Lahaina ran dry. They ran out of water. What was the rationale for stopping the water over the course of that 5 hours? Apparently, the guy who is in charge of this agency, this Water Resource Management Commission for Hawaii's Department of Land and Natural Resources, his name is M. Calio Manuel, they delayed the request for water because they were concerned that it may affect a local farmer. What? You have an entire community burning down. You need the water imminently. This is not a hard decision. This is like, keeping Bagram when you exit Afghanistan. This is one of the obvious ones. Get water to the fire. But in case you're wondering what kind of guy M. Calio Manuel is, here's some old video of him that has now surfaced talking about how water, that precious resource, should be treated.
We've become used to looking at water as like something which we use and not necessarily something that we revere as that thing that gives us life, right? I mean, to me, it's a shift in value set. And, if we can start to really look at how we as humans in an island can reconnect to that traditional value set. So really my motto is always like, let water connect us and not divide us. Like we can share it.
Unbelievable.
But it requires
unbelievable
true conversations about equity.
What a moron. So they put a moron in charge of water, and the result, 5 hours of deliberation before they decide to finally send some water in Lahaina's direction. That's a lot of valuable time gone. Also, I want to point out this climate change thing that the left always wields in order to take away your power and enhance theirs is once again so stupid. Anyone who knows anything about Hawaii, now I lived in Hawaii for a couple of years when I was a kid. My dad was stationed at the Marine Corps base there on Oahu. And we lived on the eastern side of Oahu. The eastern side of all of the Hawaiian Islands is called the windward side. The western side is called the leeward side. The trade winds that come into the islands come from east to west, and as they do, they bring moisture to the eastern part of the island, and then it's a much drier situation on the west side, much drier, to the point that you're like, am I even in Hawaii? It's like desert-like conditions in some cases. It looks a lot more like drier sections of California on the western side of these islands. It's not the lush tropical paradise you're thinking of. Those are the eastern parts of the islands. And so if there's anywhere in Hawaii on any given island that's ripe for a fire to run through the vegetation, it would be on the western part of the island. That's always been the case. It'll continue to be the case. Now, could there be better vegetation management? Yeah, totally. Could there be better infrastructure on the island to handle, 60-mile-per-hour winds that doesn't knock down electric poles? Yeah, definitely. I was trying to look up some of the wind thresholds for these electric poles. And nowadays, they say that, electric poles, when they go on the ground, you put a pole in, it can withstand up to 100 miles an hour of wind. So I was wondering, how did Hawaii have 60-mile-per-hour winds, as they claim, that knocked down these poles that started these fires? What happened there? Well, it's just, Democrats ran it into the ground. That's the answer. That's the answer. And it was power lines that started at least some of the fires. Here's one local resident telling local Hawaiian media, Shane Treu is his name. He's a Lahaina resident. He's describing what he saw on that fateful day, August 8th.
And I hear a pop coming from across the street. As soon as I hear the pop, all I heard is like electrical, like going on the ground there. Look, there's the power line right there. And shortly after, thing was just arcing away on the ground, landed right in dry grass, so sparks, and then there was a fire. So the fire from there, to me, it simulated a fuse, like somebody lit a fuse for a firework, and it just followed a straight line all the way up to the pole where the thing was, and it landed in a bigger pile of dry grass, and that just ignited. You get all this wind blowing, and all you.
So what he's describing is the fire then crawls across, goes to the pole, ignites the whole pole. The pole eventually falls over because it's burning. It lights even more grass.
At a fire, that was fuel, and just in a matter of minutes, that whole place was just engulfed.
Everything was engulfed. Everything was engulfed. You had people diving into the ocean. I don't know what the currents were like that day, but if you have 60-mile-per-hour winds heading from east to west and you're diving into the ocean on the western side of the island, that doesn't seem like a good situation. The Coast Guard making a number of saves. But still, 1,000 people unaccounted for. How many children are among the missing? Reporters confronted the mayor of Maui about this question, and this just did not go well for this mayor. Another moron.
I don't know.
Yes, you do. How many children are missing?
So the answer to that question would be pretty easy to establish, right? Because when you say that a child is missing, that's the product of someone making a report. So you can answer that question. How many children are we listed as missing right now?
You know. I knew the answer to that. I would be happy to answer that.
You have no estimate as to how many children are missing?
I guess we can end this right now if you guys want.
We can end this right now if you guys want. Do you hear him? You hear how patronizing he is? Don't make me come back there kind of attitude. He's like, we can end this right now.
Sorry,
this is one of the biggest questions that the people of Lahaina have, but you don't want to answer.
It always takes one or two to ruin it for everybody.
You hear the lecture? It always takes one or two to ruin it for everybody. This man is supposed to be a public servant. These are adults asking him questions. And here he is lecturing them about asking questions he doesn't want to answer.
This is our only opportunity.
Well, we could say that about you. You ruined it for everyone.
You're welcome to say it. You're the media. You can say whatever you want.
You're a disaster.
All right. Okay.
You've been the worst mayor we could possibly imagine.
You won't even wait.
Respect what? This is the most dismal response we've ever had.
You won't wait for your turn. You want to shout over these guys that are legitimate.
Why don't you give them the real answers then? Give them the real answers.
That's not his question.
Let him.
Yeah. You can go. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
You have been a disaster. You have been a disaster. You have been the worst mayor. Unbelievable. What's going on there in Hawaii? And federal officials aren't giving much better answers either. Here's on CNN, Breonna Keeler is stunned that we don't have information on who's missing.
You say that we have to ask the Hawaii officials for the count, but you also say that you are working with them. I think it's hard for people to understand, there are potentially 1,000 people who have perished in this fire. How can we not know more about this many days out?
Yeah, again, we take all of our numbers from the local officials and we are supporting them with our teams to help better understand. And I think
blaming the locals.
The unaccounted piece is just making sure that we are accounting for everybody that was reported as missing. And it could be that they are staying with family and friends and we haven't been able to contact them yet. There's a lot of different reasons on why people are unaccounted for.
Yeah, even CNN is stunned by what they're hearing from the Biden administration. Finally, on Biden, today on Air Force One en route to Maui, here's a Biden spokeswoman by the name of Olivia Dalton asked about all of this.
I also just want to take a step back because I think it's important to remember that the president has been there from day one, marshaling a whole of government response to this. To the wildfires. And
when she says he's been there since day one, she means on vacation, on a beach, in Delaware, and now Lake Tahoe. He's been there since day one. He's a radio host. He was on The Breakfast Club alongside the host, Charlamagne Thagad. Charlamagne is also the guy who Joe Biden told him, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. Larry Elder has something to say about that.
Is the term wake-up call?
No.
It is an incident where a person of color forgets that they are of color and are reminded rather brutally by an unexpected act of racism. Have you ever had any of those?
Oh, brother.
I'm just asking. You think you've ever
had
any of those?
I'm acutely aware, Charlamagne, that I'm a black person, just as you are a black person. And when Joe Biden insulted you by saying, you ain't really black, we don't know whether or not you want to vote for me or vote for Donald Trump, it seems to me that should have been a wake-up call on your part. How dare this guy come in here and insult you, a black man, and tell you got to think a certain kind of way? I'm amazed that you weren't mad about that.
I'm not gonna say it upset me, just like I'm not letting you upset me. You know what I mean? I don't tend to get upset over things like that. But what I did say,
well, you just not talk about it, a wake-up call, and it seemed to me that should have been a wake-up call on your part to have a white guy come in here who also said, by the way, about Mitt Romney. because he didn't want to put more regulations on Wall Street, going to put y'all back in chains. And Joe Biden has lied for decades about his civil rights record, claiming that he desegregated movie theaters and restaurants in Wilmington, Delaware, when he didn't do any of that. He lied and said that he tried to visit Nelson Mandela during apartheid South Africa. He did not. And he came in here and told you aren't even black and let you think a certain kind of way. It seemed to me that should have been a wake-up call for you, but it wasn't, apparently.
I mean, for the record, I'm not a Democrat or Republican.
I didn't say you were.
Yeah, I think both.
I don't know what you are. I never even asked you about your party affiliation.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, but you are black. And to have a white guy come in here and tell you have to say think a certain kind of way, otherwise you, quote, ain't black. Wow.
How should I have replied to him, you think?
What I just now said. How dare you insult me and tell me I think as a human being, let alone as a black person? I don't tell you how to think, Joe Biden. How dare you come in here and tell me how I should think? I'm going to vote for Donald Trump if I want to vote for Donald Trump.
This guy's a national treasure, isn't he?
And if I want to vote for Donald Trump, it does not make me not black. 20% of black people, black men, as I said, voted for Donald Trump in 2020. Are they not black now? So only 80% of black people, black men walking around are really black. 20% are not because they voted for Donald Trump. How insulting is that? How condescending is that?
I mean, you're probably right, but I didn't take it in that way.
Yeah, you put that man in a verbal headlock. He's not coming out of it. He's tapping out now. He's like, all right, let's move on. You got me. Yeah, he did. Good for you, Larry Elder. We need more of that in America, don't we? Some conversations. It's 5:58. It's now time to check in with the great one, Mark Levin, up next here on WMAL.